I'm Joan Brzezinski. I direct the China Center, and our speaker today is Professor Daisy Yan Du. She is the author of Animated Encounters, Transnational Movements in Chinese Animation, 1940s to 1970s. Her referee journals have appeared in the Journal of Cinema, Media Studies, Discourse, Positions, Modern Chinese Literature and Culture, Journal of Chinese Cinemas, Women's Studies Quarterly, and Gender and History, among others. She is the lead editor of Chinese Animation, Multiplicities in Motion, which is first edited scholastic book about Chinese animation. She's also the editor of Chinese Animation and Socialism from an Animator's Perspective, which is the first kind that compromises essays that are written by renowned animators rather than scholars. And she's also the founder of Association for Chinese Animation Studies and a faculty member at the Division of Humanities at the Hong Kong University of Science and Technology. Nezha too has really taken off, and it's gotten everybody's attention. So we're so pleased to have Professor Du here with us on her talk about techno-nationalism and the rise of Chinese animation, Nezha too, and the evolution of CGI blockbusters in China. Welcome, Professor Du.
Thank you, Joanna, for your wonderful introduction, and also thank the China Center at for inviting me to give this talk about Nezha too. I really apologize, for the technical problems. I was unable to share the screen, and I prepared the PPT and also a lot of film clips. But today I'm not, going to share them with you. But later, after the meeting, I will ask Haiyan to share my PPT with all of you so that you know what I'm talking about. I apologize again for the technical glitches, although I'm from the University of Science and Technology, but the technology here always fails us. So I will start my talk by just relying on my own PPT here. Even though you cannot see it, I think you can still get the point I'm trying to make. So now let me begin. 3D CGI animation has long been regarded as an American innovation pioneered by Pixar's Toy Story in 1995. Toy Story has been regarded as the first CGI animated feature film in the world. So in 1990s China, the task for Chinese animators was to master 3D CGI animation and to catch up with the technology represented by Pixar. There was a strong sense of Techno-Nationalism in the sense that mastering 3D CGI technology was not just an individual learning process, but also a national project to advance the country's animation industry. So the journey began with the release of Little Tiger Ban Ban in 2001. This has been regarded as the first CGI animated feature film in China. It was produced by China Children's Film Studio in Beijing. And Little Tiger Ban Ban was designed as a thriller. It was famous for its spookiness, and many children were scared and then could not fall asleep after watching this film. It was a box office failure because it was unable to attract the audience. In 2005, in Hong Kong, the animators produced another CGI animated feature film, Dragon Blade: The Legend of Lang. It's based on the Kung Fu style. Again, it's a box office failure. The turning point came in 2004 with the production of Through the Mobius Strip. This film tried to emulate The Lord of the Rings. It's a box failure again. However, although this film was a box office failure, it was nonetheless a CGI technology milestone in the history of Chinese animation. It was produced by GDC, Global Digital Creations Holdings, a CGI studio located in Shenzhen. GDC was a leading CGI studio in China. At that time, Shenzhen was the center of CGI studios in China, and now the center was moved to Beijing. Chinese animators spent 5 years for the production of Through the Mobius Strip. the budget was 130 million yuan, but the box office revenue just reaped 3.4 million yuan. And the reason for the box office failure was because of the film script. So the story was a mixture of East and West, and the story did not appeal to Eastern or Western audience either. So after the failure of Through the Mobius strip, GDC gave up creative animation, and the studio began to work on animation projects outsourced from the West and Japan. The turning point came in 2015 with the release of Monkey King Hero is Back. This film, for the first time in history, the CGI technology achieved domestic box office success. And the film was adapted from traditional Chinese literature. It's a well-known story in Chinese literature. And then in 2019, another film, Nezha, was released. Again, it was a domestic box office success. It was adapted from traditional Chinese literature. In addition to Monkey and Nezha, there were other CGI animated feature films were produced, such as White Snake, Big Fish, Begonia, and others. In 2025, Nezha 2 was released, and it became a global box office success. It's the highest grossing animated feature film in world history, surpassing Pixar and Disney. So Nezha 2 is based on the traditional Chinese literature. Nezha and the monkey can be regarded as symbols of China, then tell a good Chinese story to promote the soft power of Chinese culture. The production of Nezha 2 was supported by the government. The Sichuan government, for example, invested a lot of money for the production of Nezha 2 as a cultural project. What is so striking about Nezha 2 is its CGI technology. In the beginning, the director of the film was not confident about domestic Chinese CGI technology, so he outsourced the most difficult parts to overseas CGI studios. However, the overseas CGI studios delivered sloppy work, so the director of the film, Zhao Zi, was not satisfied. He decided to rely on domestic Chinese CGI studios to render the CGI effects. So basically, the film mobilized 138 studios involving 4,000 animators in mainland China. So basically, the CGI technology reached a peak, and it can even rival the CGI visual effects prominent in Pixar or Hollywood blockbusters. Of course, the Techno-Nationalism was prominent here as the Chinese animators tried to indigenize the technology and tried to make everything by themselves. So here I want to talk about the global trends in the film industry since the 1990s. There were actually two kinds of social historical forces that were undergoing since the 1990s. So the first trend was digitization. The 1990s has long been regarded as the age of digital culture. The second trend was globalization, and the entire world became a global village since the 1990s. So in the larger contexts of digitization and globalization, the Hollywood blockbuster style emerged in the world. So basically, the Hollywood blockbuster style was characterized by its CGI-rich visual spectacles and then targeted a global audience, usually with a big budget and with ambition to achieve big box office success. According to Kristen Wiesel, the cinema's digital turn and the rise of computer-generated imagery, CGI, are most often associated with the spectacular big-budget digital visual effects that have become a staple of the blockbuster film. A typical example of this Hollywood blockbuster film is Avatar, Avatar was released in 2009, and it became a box office success in China in 2010. According to Jason McGrath, if Jurassic Park and Toy Story helped to launch the digital revolution in mainstream cinema, Avatar, which dominated the Chinese box office in 2010, surely marked how successful it had become, both financially and, in some ways at least, artistically. So, in the context of digitization and globalization since the 1990s, two modes of Chinese cinema emerged. The first mode was the blockbuster model. So, like Hollywood, it was characterized by CGI-rich spectacles, and the Chinese blockbuster films also tried to catch up with Hollywood with big budget and with the ambition to achieve box office success. According to Yumi Brister, supporters of the blockbuster model in China have evoked a discourse of urgency, seeing a pressing need for overhauling the film industry to comport with Hollywood's technological skills and achieving comparable levels of revenue. In the name of a viable domestic market, they established a strong link between digital special effects and box office success. So, in addition to the blockbuster model, another model emerged in China. That was the cinephania model. Although there is no clear-cut boundary between the two models, the cinephania model is different from the blockbuster model. The cinephania model tries to return to earlier images to reaffirm cinema's historical role. In other words, the cinephania model tries to return to localized film history by reasserting film's indexicality in the analog age. According to many of the audience members, Nezha 2 belongs to the blockbuster model. Nezha 2 is a big budget film, and everything is big. According to Mihailova, Nezha 2 is a maximalist project that swings big in every conceivable way, delivering on every item of the blockbuster checklist: monumental scale, non-stop hyperkinetic action, intricate world building, and technological bravado. I want to say that the CGI technology in China was not just used to produce the blockbuster films, it was also used to produce the cinephania model films. So, in other words, there was also a strong desire for Chinese animators to return to earlier images. A typical example is Goro Flying, 班宁飞渡. The Shanghai Animation Film Studio has been working on this CGI ink painting animated feature film for more than 10 years. Different from Nezha 2, 班宁飞渡, Goro Flying tries to recreate the visual effects prominent in traditional ink painting animation that emerged in the 1960s. The animators tried to use modern CGI technologies to reproduce the diffusion of ink on the mulberry paper and also to create the gradation of ink and also the ink tonalities. So because I cannot share my screen, I strongly encourage you to Google this the trailer for 班宁飞渡. The Shanghai Animation Film Studio originally planned to release this film in 2025, but the production has been delayed. So the new release date is 2026. And this style, the CGI style in this film is very different from Nezha 2. Nezha 2 is a blockbuster, a lot of fighting, violence, and also spectacular digital effects. While Goro Flying is more about animals, the story of a group of animals, and it tries to use CGI technology to reproduce the traditional ink painting animation in China. So now let me talk about Nezha 2. In existing studies of digital cinema, there has been a heated debate revolving around the tension between visual spectacles and storytelling, or the tension between spectacularity and narrative. The conventional view is that the CGI effects swamp the story, or the digital technology predominates over storytelling. In other words, a storytelling is subordinate to the digital effects. This idea can be traced back to Tom Gauning's concept of the cinema of attractions. According to Tom Gauning, film has long been regarded as a narrative form with a mission to tell a story. And this tradition has been established by Hollywood storytelling. And also, by Hollywood storytelling, also enabled and reinforced by Hollywood continuity editing. However, according to Tom Gauning, in early cinema, there emerged a different kind of a film called cinema of attractions. The cinema of attractions was not to tell a story. The cinema of attractions was to shock and surprise the audience and to evoke the sensory reactions from the audience. The cinema of attractions appeared before 1906 and then vanished in 1906 or 1907, but then did not completely vanish. Rather, they went underground and then became special effects in analog films. However, in the digital age, cinema of attractions began to dominate the big screen, especially in blockbuster films. A lot of digital effects, a lot of visual spectacles. So the second opinion about the tension between visual spectacles and the storytelling is that the digital effects can derive from story, and the digital effects can even reinforce storytelling. This idea has been proposed by Shiloh McLean and also Kristen Wiesel. According to Kristen Wiesel, many awe-inspiring, spectacular visual effects articulate a range of complex concepts and thematic concerns that are central both to the narratives of the films in which they appear and to the broader historical contexts in which the films were produced and exhibited. So this is the counter argument about the relationship between visual spectacles and storytelling. So if we examine Nezha 2, we can say that for most Chinese audience members, the CGI spectacles were very impressive. And there was also a sense of Techno-Nationalism among the Chinese audience as well, because it's possibly the first time for the Chinese audience to watch such kind of visual spectacles, not seen in previous Chinese animated films. As for the story, because the Chinese audience was already familiar with the story, so maybe the story was more original, look more original for the foreigners due to the cultural barrier. Because for many of the foreigners, it was possibly their first time to watch a Chinese animated film. So maybe the foreigners were impressed, by both CGI spectacles and also the original story created by the cultural barriers. So now I will focus on one particular digital effect, one particular visual spectacle prominent in Nezha 2. That is the digital multitude. What is digital multitude? According to Kristen Wiesel, using a number of technologies such as motion capture, 3D animation simulation programs, such as massive digital split screen techniques, crowd simulation engines, motion trees, and libraries, and particle animation programs such as Dynamation. visual effects houses have created massive computer-generated armies, swarms, armadas, and hordes composed of as many as hundreds of thousands of digital beings, what might be called the digital multitude. So basically, the digital multitude is about spectacular group formation or the mass element, and it can create the aesthetics of a digital sublime. The digital multitude often occurs at the most epic, apocalyptic, and historical change. So in other words, the digital multitude can also reinforce storytelling. I prepared 3 film clips, but I'm unable to screen them for our audience. I really apologize for that. But since many of you have watched the Nezha 2, so I will just use my own language to describe the 3 film clips I'm going to screen here. So the first film script, the clip is about the sea monsters coming out to fight with Chen Tangguan. According to the animation director, almost 1 million monsters and chains were made. And this sequence was originally outsourced to an overseas CGI animation studio, but later then delivered a snappy work. So Zhao Zi and his teammates decided to rely on domestic Chinese CGI studios to render this part, the chains, 1 million monsters and chains. The second film clip is about the fight in the sky between the Taoist guards and also Nezha together with the sea monsters. So around like 100 million Taoist guards descend, and this kind of then form a kind of a group, a Jinko tree. Jinko tree is a symbolic tree in Chengdu, Sichuan province. So that's why the animators used this kind of image of the Jinko tree to stand for Chengdu, the capital of Sichuan province. The third film clip I want to share with our audience is a final battle between the 2 forces. One is the evil the evil man and also the Taoist masters. And also the other side is the Nezha Aobi, sea monsters and humans. And according to the animators, almost 200 million Taoist guards, sea monsters, and humans were created. And so the animators were very cheeky and then tried to render such kind of digital details down to every single human being, down to every single monster. And this part has been regarded as the most challenging part. The digital multitude has been discussed by the film director Zhao Zi again and again to show how Chinese animators and the CGI houses did such a fantastic job to make the impossible possible. So basically, I feel that Nezha 2 is impressive mostly for its spectacular digital effects. So now I want to offer a feminist reading of Nezha 2 in relation to Techno-Nationalism. I want to argue that Techno-Nationalism often predominates over feminism. Why? This is because technology has long been regarded as a field dominated by men. And nationalism is also associated with the masculine discourse, with violent actions, this kind of comradeship, so on and so forth. So combined together, techno-nationalism can doubly dominate women. To illustrate my argument, I want to analyze the death of Nezha's mother. In this film, Nezha's mother dies and becomes a pearl. After the death of Nezha's mother, Nezha grows up, gains power, and defeats the villains. I want to share the film clip here But I cannot. But since you have watched the film, so I think you can recall this sequence when Nezha's mother dies. This sequence has been regarded by many mainland Chinese audience members as the most emotionally charged and also the most touching part for this film. I want to analyze Nezha's vanishing mother by using some feminist film criticism. Whenever we talk about feminist film criticism, we always cite Lola Mulvey's concept of the male gaze. Lola Mulvey argues that the overpresence of female bodies on mainstream cinema represents the objectification and eroticization of the female bodies. And so the female bodies subordinate to male gaze reinforces this kind of male power. So they are subordinate to this kind of male domination. Karen Beckman engages with Lola Mulvey's concept of the male gaze. She argued that even when the female bodies shy away from the male gaze, even when the female bodies vanish from the screen, they are still subject to male domination and control. She uses the trope. She uses the image of the vanishing lady in early trick films to support her argument. For example, in the film Vanishing Lady, made by George Méliès in 1896, the male magician uses magic. It's actually a stop motion technique to make a lady vanish. So Karen Beckman argues that such kind of dynamic relationship between the male magician and the vanishing women is actually a kind of a power relationship. So the male magician is always controlling the female body and making the female body vanish. So the vanishing lady reinforces the power of the male magician. Karen Beckman continues to analyze the many social events in which the female surplus bodies were often disposed by patriarchs and institutions. She also analyzes the vanishing lady represented on screen and argues that the unstable female bodies prone to disappearance is a projection of male anxieties about the untested, unstable visual technologies. Just like the case of the vanishing lady, so it's a projection of the male magician's anxiety about the new stop motion cinematic technology. So if we draw on Karen Beckman's feminist film criticism, we can argue that Nezha's vanishing mother can be regarded as the techno-nationalist projection of the ideal mother who sacrifices her life for the collective and grand cause. And Nezha's vanishing mother, the unstable female body, can also be regarded as a projection of animators' anxieties of untested, unstable, emerging Chinese 3D CGI technology. I want to emphasize that the techno-nationalism and also the vanishing mother in Nezha too is not unique in Chinese animation. It's not unique in China. It's actually a kind of a recurrent motif in animation. I will give you an example from Japan. Evangelion, a TV animation series produced in 1995. This TV animation series feature three mechas, or three giant war machines. They were designed by the best scientists in Japan to fight against the villains, the aliens called angels. In the beginning, due to the limitation of technology, the three giant war machines are unstable. to stabilize the giant war machines, the mothers sacrifice themselves and become liquids planted inside the giant war machines, inside the metals. The drivers are the mother's sons and daughters. So basically, the vanished mother in Evangelion in this Japanese animation series function as the water inside a pregnant mother's uterus to provide a kind of a communion or connection between the giant war machine and her son or daughter. So the mother functions as a kind of a linkage. So the mother volunteers to become liquids in order to stabilize the giant war machine for the benefits of the country, for the benefits of the human species. So I'd like to say that the unstable female bodies prone to disappearance is very common in global animations. So here comes to my conclusion. Driven by the forces of techno-nationalism, Chinese animators have strived relentlessly since the 1990s to catch up with and even rival the achievements of Pixar and Hollywood blockbusters. The dazzling digital effects showcased in Nezha 2, proudly celebrated as made in China, mark a significant milestone in the evolution of Chinese CGI technology, positioning it on par with global leaders like Pixar and Hollywood. This technological advancement has not only elevated the stature of Chinese animation on the global stage, but also underscored the country's growing prowess in digital innovation. However, this fervent pursuit of techno-nationalism often comes at the expense of feminist representation, as the unstable, vanishing female body serves as a symbolic vessel for the geeky animators to project their anxieties about the untested, unstable, and precarious nature of emerging Chinese CGI technology in the realms of global computer graphics and creative industries. So that's my presentation. I hope we can bring up more discussions during the Q&A. Thank you so much for your patience. I apologize again for the inability to show the film clips.
Hi, Daisy, your camera's off, so if you put that please on, and then we'll answer any questions that people have. I'd like to start by thanking you so much for your presentation, and I know how stressful this must have been not to have your particular slide deck with you, and appreciate that. But we will definitely get the PDFs out to anybody who would like to, and we can post it on the website as well as email them out if people would like that. And I see your camera's on, but I don't see you. I don't know what's going on.
I turned on my camera, but I was unable to display on screen. I don't know why.
That is strange. So, does anyone have any questions for Daisy? Oh, here's one. Do you see a ripple effect from animation industries to other creative sectors, such as gaming, or regular cinema, or VR?
So sorry, I think the signal is not so stable. Can you repeat the question?
Of course, I'll repeat it. Do you see a ripple effect from animation industries to other creative sectors, such as gaming or regular cinema or VR?
Yes, I do see such kind of ecosystem. For example, in the video game industry, Black Myth Wukong, became another blockbuster, in the video game industry. In addition to the animated blockbuster Nezha 2. So I feel that the reason why the kind of ecology, this kind of cinematic ecology emerged in recent years in China is because of the maturation or the development of Chinese CGI technology. In the past, challenging for Chinese animators to render, such kind of 3D images. But with the progression, with the development of Chinese CGI technology, nowadays Chinese animators can do 3D CGI animation blockbusters and can do video games. They can also work on VRs.
Thank you. Are Chinese filmmakers collaborating with Western filmmakers now, or is the techno-nationalism aspect of this preventing this from happening?
Yes, that's a very good question. Actually, I feel that Chinese animators wanted to collaborate with overseas CGI houses or colleagues, but somehow there were some kind of barriers, I'd like to say, such as the quality of the work and the high expense, because labor in China was kind of cheaper. So after the success of Nezha 2, I think many Chinese animators would largely rely on domestic Chinese animation studios to do the technological parts for their films.
Thank you. I have an observation, I guess. I don't know if it's a question, but when the mother died, and I appreciated your comments on the weakness of the female form, and but I really couldn't help but thinking about all the princesses in the Disney movies and all the dead mothers there. So I just wondered if there was some sort of connection or link to that.
Yes, that's a very good question. I do feel that in this such kind of very high tech Chinese animation, the mother has been like sacrificed, for the grand course of her son, and in Disney, like Snow White, Cinderella, right? The mother always die. The reason why mothers die is because their daughters need to grow up and to marry a prince. So I do feel that the absent mothers in Disney feature films has some kind of connection with Nezha's mother. So although in different forms.
Yeah, cultural perspective, I guess.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you so much, Professor Du, for your wonderful talk. I liked your argument on feminist critical engagement, which with the techno-nationalism. Since this film is often compared with previous version in 1970s, I wonder if you could talk about on different approaches by Nezha 2 and the 1970s film on their depictions of female and male characters.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think in the earlier version, Nezha, made in 1979, that version was made right after the Cultural Revolution. And actually, the Chinese animators at the Shanghai Animation Film Studio started that animation project in the 1950s as a possible Sino-Soviet co-production. However, the co-production failed, and it was postponed until 1979. And in that earlier version, I think Nezha, the story of Nezha was more faithful, to the traditional Chinese literature. So there was a kind of tension between Nezha and his father, right? So basically, Nezha's father was represented as a patriarch, and Nezha was challenging the authority of his father and trying to like kill the dragon. And so I feel that in the new version of Nezha 2, the family is more harmonious. It's more harmonious. You can see the unconditional love of the parents for Nezha. Like the mother is becoming more and more caring. The mother is like very devoted to her son, and and according to Jiaozi, the film director's interviews, the reason why he changes the family environment from the 1979 version to Nezha 2 is because of his own family. So actually, the director of the film, Jiao Zi, grew up in a family with a lot of parental love. So basically, he just gave up his decent job as a doctor in China, and he began to stay home and relied on his parents, modest salary to do animation. And he was a social outcast, so his colleagues, classmates, and relatives just did not understand his choice. But his mother defended him, and his mother supported him, and also his father also was very supportive. But his father just died when Jiaozi was still young. So I felt that the change of family relationship in Nezha 2 was kind of a reflection of Jiaozi, the film director's own life. Yeah.
Thank you. I think this question is from Jason McGrath, but I'm not quite sure. This is confusing. It says, I watched Najatu at a local AMC theater here in Minnesota in 3D, which made it more spectacular and immersive. It made me wonder whether most screenings in China are in 3D, or is 3D provided only to a minority of screens as it was here in North America. Do you happen to know what the exhibition situation was in mainland China?
I think there were multiple formats, for Nezha 2. You can watch it as a 2D film. You can also watch it as a 3D. You have to wear the goggles. There's also IMAX version. So multiple versions were made for Nezha 2. What I found interesting from the Chinese audience members is that most audience complained that them felt dizzy while watching Nezha 2. Then had this kind of dizziness, especially for children. I heard some complaints from children, them felt dizzy while watching Nezha 2.
Oh, it's very stimulating visually, I can imagine. Could you talk about the culture gap? Sorry, I cannot phrase the question better. Because there are so many aspects of it. Do you think, I'm not sure if he's speaking to West and East culture gaps or.
Yeah, that's a very good question. And I think this is a issue prominent in contemporary Chinese animation. So that is to say, um, um, for Japanese animation, some scholars argue that the reason why Japanese animation is so successful in the world is because they are de-Japanized. In other words, in order to cater to the tastes of the foreigners, especially the Americans and the Westerners, Japanese animators tried to de-Japanize their products to make their films look more universal, have more humanitarian values, welcomed in the West. And this is what Iwabuchi Koichi calls culturally odorless. So for Japanese animation to be successful overseas, the Japanese smell, the odor has to be removed first so that then can be welcomed in the United States and the Western world. However, Chinese animation follows a different path. I don't know why, but there's a strong obsession with the Chinese identity in Chinese animation. It's very different from anime. And Chinese animators always feel proud that this is a Chinese style and this is a Chinese story. For example, like Nezha 2 is based on a Chinese story, and this is perfectly aligned with the Chinese government's call for telling a good Chinese story based on traditional Chinese culture. Like Li Ziqi was promoted, by the Chinese government precisely because Li Ziqi promoted the traditional, Chinese cuisine, the Chinese culture. So I feel that this kind of obsession with Chineseness or obsession with Chinese identity can create some kind of cultural barrier between the Chinese film, and the foreign audiences. And I cannot predict, what will happen next. But this is the trend for Chinese animation. If you look at other successful Chinese CGI animated feature films like Monkey King, Hero is Back. They all follow this kind of model, Chineseness, a Chinese story, and maybe then have learned a lesson from the previous failures, like the one I mentioned through the Mobius strip. That film had a big budget, but it was a box office failure. And the reason for the failure of that film was because of its storytelling. So the story is a combination of like a Western and Eastern motifs, and it became a kind of hybrid storytelling. And the story did not appeal to Chinese audience. It did not appeal to Western audience. So maybe Chinese animators, learned a lesson from the previous failures. So now I feel that they are more interested in rendering Chinese stories, even in video games. Than just use Monkey King, and also using traditional Chinese culture and the Chinese stories can secure the market, because traditional Chinese stories already have established audience. They know they are going to sell.
Thank you. Is the addition of high special effects an effective way to promote animation overseas, or an obstacle? Because when I watched Nezha 1, some English critics thought the special effects made people visually tired, which seemed to be an aesthetic difference. Thank you for your presentation.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, about the digital special effects, as I discussed in my lecture, there are many arguments about the digital spectacles for for them undermine the storytelling. Um, I think the Chinese animators were trying to emulate the Hollywood, blockbuster style, trying to create something that is very big. Um, and I personally, I can only speak for myself. Personally, I don't think the digital spectacles can function as a kind of a barrier for a foreign audience. Uh, on the contrary, I think the digital special effects can function as a universal language, a kind of universal cinematic language to bridge the gap between the East and the West. I feel that the story can create this kind of cultural gap or cultural barrier, but I feel that the digital effects or technology itself is international.
Thank you. In traditional narratives, Nezha is a character whose gender is difficult to distinguish, but in the new version, the setting seems to be abandoned and Nezha is completely portrayed as a sloppy little boy. Is this the masculine narrative?
Yes, I do think so. I think it's just kind of following the hero, that kind of a type, a Chinese hero. It is Chinese, right? So it's part of the Techno-Nationalism, that kind of discourse about the gender of Nezha. Yeah, I'm also curious, about the gender of Nezha, and uh, I can only speak for myself. If I am going to adapt, Nezha to, if I'm involved in script writing for Nezha 3, for example, I would like to change Nezha to a spicy Sichuanese girl because I feel that Nezha's personality is more like a typical Sichuanese spicy girl, and a Sichuanese boy does not look like Nezha. I feel that Aobi is more like a Sichuanese boy, that kind of personality.
Thank you.
But this is just my personal observation, so
That's
don't take it
beautiful.
seriously.
Wonderful. Okay, last question. The techno-nationalism in the film from a feminist perspective is brilliant, especially the vanishing mother reminds me of other female figures. For instance, we don't see Ao Bing's mother, and even though many fans call Ao Guang, which means male mother, since he brought up Ao Bing alone, Ao Guang doesn't vanish eventually. Many female audiences already angry about the sacrificed mother image and create many fan works. I wonder, how do you see the tension between fandom and techno nationalism? Great
Oh,
question.
that's a very good question. And I think this question can be related to Joanne's own observation about the absent mothers in Disney, feature films. The princess mother is always dead, already dead. And so there's a kind of connection here. I do agree with you. I feel that this is a kind of techno-nationalist project involving many men, right? It's kind of very masculine discourse. And Albin's mother is absent, just like Cinderella's mother is already dead, when the story begins. Um, so there's a kind of feminist, engagement with the absent mothers in these films, and I found that it's universal. I don't know why. Maybe this is the old saying that a child grows up only after the mother dies. When the mother is still alive, the child is always a child, even when he is 60 or 70 years old. Maybe this is something that is universal, not just in China, but also in Japan and in the United States as well.
So fascinating. This has been a really excellent discussion and a really fine talk. Thank you so much for joining us. And yes, we will post the PPT to our website and then send a link to everybody so that you can enjoy the full presentation later. Thank you again to Professor Du for joining us, and thank you all for joining us at webinar today. Please consider helping us continue to provide engaging program like this with a gift to the China Center. You can do so through the link on the webinar announcement on our website. Everybody have a great day. Thank you so much. Take care.